Let's get started. First off, my name is Eleanor. I am an undergraduate here at Simmons studying data science and analytics. I'm in my last semester. And I do a lot of work with R. I also have taken several LIS classes here and there. I work at the library, so I have a pretty good understanding of at least some aspects of the LIS profession. And today I am going to present on R for LIS Professionals. Okay, so first off, what is R? R is a free software environment for statistical computing and graphics. That probably, it makes it sound a lot more complicated than it actually is. What it is it's like halfway between a coding language and a statistical software package. So what it essentially allows you to do is create models and graphics based on data in a really customizable way that a lot of other platforms don't allow you to do. Okay, so a brief history of R. R is a derivative program of like the S programming language, which was developed in the mid-1970s. Then around 1991, a group of PhD students started to create R for a graduate level thesis, and they decided to make this open source statistical software package, and it essentially kept developing. More people got on board, and in 2000 the first version of R was released, and since then it's been consistently updated, and because it's open source, there's been a huge amount of contributions from the community that use R. So people have come up with infinite numbers of packages and additions, and if there's something something that doesn't exist, somebody will probably eventually create it, because that's kind of how open source works. So how can R be used specifically in LIS? R is great for data processing, massive amounts of data, textual analysis, and visualization. I think visualization, from what I found, is probably the most applicable use, especially for people that are just starting out. It's pretty easy to learn compared to the others, although the others aren't that hard to learn either. But visualization, at least the basics, you can teach yourself in a couple of hours, and the endpoint is kind of unlimited. You can go as far as you want. So why should R be used in LIS? First is research reproducibility. When you're working in R, it documents every single change you make to a data set. And if any of you have worked with data sets before, when you're cleaning them and changing them, you have to document every single change you make to a specific data set. And if you're doing that in Excel, it's incredibly tedious, because you have to make a change and then go note in a separate document what change you made to that data set. So R does that automatically, so it saves you a huge amount of time. It also makes utilizing the results of any analysis you've run much easier, because you don't have to then transfer this data to a different program to do analysis on it. R already has all of that stuff in it, so you don't need to then take your Excel document, upload it to another software. It just gets so much messier. This does all of that tracking for you. It's designed to work with massive amounts of data. You can work with millions and millions and millions of columns of data, huge amounts of data. And you can also, it also works just as well with small amounts of data. It's free and it's open source. It's comparable to a lot of other statistical computing and visualization softwares like SAS, but those can be really, really pricey for an institution. So like if you're trying to convince where you work to get something like that, you're going to have to make a much stronger case than just downloading something that's already free and open source. It's also very helpful to non-programmers and beginners. There's tons and tons of documentation online. Most people I know who work with R have just taught themselves from what they've learned online. at least the vast majority of it. There's so much out there, and so much good documentation out there too. It has a less steep learning curve for non-programmers than comparable software. It's not set up the way traditional programming languages are. I wouldn't even really call it a programming language. There is some technical programming in it, but it's much easier to learn, at least I would say so, and I think a lot of other people would say so, than something like Python. It has fantastic visualization tools. Absolutely fantastic. Specifically, what I'm going to go into is the ggplot2 package, which allows you to make incredible visuals pretty easily, and they're incredibly customizable. Okay, so I am now going to do a walkthrough of how you would go about making some of these visuals. Okay, so this is what R looks like when it's pulled up. You have your console. This is our studio. Sorry. Yes. When you first download R, you'll just download the base R. Nobody works in base R. Well, there are a few people that work in base R, but it's for very specific reasons, and I wouldn't ever recommend working in just base R. So then what you're going to want to also download before anything else is R Studio, which is essentially just it just makes R much easier to work with and interact with. So this is R Studio. So later we'll be going through a tutorial on these computers, and you're going to want to open R Studio. I can help any of you with that. Also, if you would like to download any of this onto your own computers, I can also help you with that when we get to it. But yes, R Studio is what you want to work in. Okay, so right down here is the console. Console is what you are going to be typing into. So I have already installed the ggplot2 package onto this computer. It's not installed onto any of those. It is easy to install with just a command. I can show you if you're interested. R comes with a lot of packages that are already in the program. You just have to install them. There's different kinds, but ggplot2 is one of the ones that comes like built in with RStudio. So you just have to type in a command to actually install it. Okay. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is I am going to tell R that we are going to be working in ggplot2. So I'm just going to go library, ggplot2. Okay. Next, I am going to tell R what data set I'm going to be using. So the diamonds data set is already in R. R comes preloaded with a bunch of data sets for you to learn on, basically play around with. You're also obviously can import your own data sets. But right now I'm just going to be using one of the ones that's already in here just for ease. Did I take that wrong? Probably. Yes, I did. Okay. So now R knows that we're using the diamonds data set. Now I'm going to tell R what I want the X and Y values to be for this. Okay. So now it knows that we are going to be comparing carat to price. Next thing I'm going to do is tell it that what I'm going to want is the variable cut to be represented by different colors for whatever kind of visual I make. And I'm going to do that by So now I have all of my base stuff into the program, so it knows what my x and y axis are, what data set I'm using, and that I want the variable cut to be represented by colors when I then go tell it what kind of visual I'm going to make. So one of the really interesting things about ggplot compared to just the base R and RStudio package when making visuals is ggplot allows you to put multiple types of visuals on top of one another. So you can have a scatter plot of one variable on top of a scatter plot of another variable on top of a scatter plot of another variable. So what I'm going to make in a minute is going to have a scatter plot of cut. So there's in this data set, there's a bunch of different cuts of diamond represented. So it's going to have a scatter plot of the price and value of the first cut over the second cut over the third cut over the fourth cut, all represented by different colors. So instead of just having the one scatter plot of this single cut, I can put all of them on top of one another, which makes for a much more comprehensive visual. Okay. And it's just going to take a minute because it's a pretty extensive. Is it running? Oh. Okay. So this is the scatter plot I made with just those commands. It has the price by the caret, and then as you can see, all of the different cuts are color-coded, and it also just auto-generates a little legend for you. And you can also go in and edit any of these things. So you can edit the color, you can edit price, caret. And so what I did here was I added a scatter plot on top of a smoothing layer. So it gives me all of the data points, but it also gives me the general trend. Which is really nice. So I actually have, I think, 10 different individual plots in one visual. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in and separate all of the different cut scatter plots so that I'm going to create a bunch of individual visuals, 5 individuals, one for each cut, side by side, because you can also display it that way if that's what you're looking for. It's incredibly easy. And that's the nice thing about R remembering all of this stuff too, is once you put in all of your initial information, it becomes incredibly easy to then go in and manipulate it. So with that, like, one line of code, I was able to go in and separate all of this into these 5 different scatter plot and trend plots. And the really great thing about R code is for almost all of it, based on what kinds of, you do have to factor in what kinds of variables you have. So obviously if you have numeric variables versus categorical variables, you can't go in and pretend words or numbers, essentially. Yeah.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So what is it called when you separate them? Is there like a word for that?
There's not a specific word. It's just you're taking a bunch of plots that were previously put on top of each other, so they were layered on top of each other, and separating them out.
Okay, cool.
Unstacking, I guess. And also, there are ways to go in and like change the colors, you can put in a title, you can change the size of the X and Y axis titles. Oddly enough, those are not harder to do. They're a little bit more finicky than other parts. With the title, you have to go in and specify the title you want. You also have to specify exactly where you want the title. So it's kind of the paradoxical funny thing about R is some of the harder things to do are the really simple things, but the more complicated things are actually really easy to do. It's not that hard, it's just a little finicky. Yeah.
And so this was made using Diamonds, which is like pre-thing. And then you can go in and upload your own.
Yeah, so you have a regular Microsoft Excel file. You can save those as CSV files, comma-separated files, and then you can just go to Import Dataset, go to From CSV, if your R is up to date, what you can do is you can go just to Import Dataset, Import from CSV, and then it'll give you a few options. Like if there's a header in the column, just specify that there's a header in the column, things like that, and then you can just easily go in and import your data set, and it will appear actually right up here. Yeah.
So you're importing the data set from your computer, it's not housed within
So R has some that come already housed in there, but most of the time what you're using R for is a data set that you already have. Yeah. So once you import it, though, it will be housed. It'll stay there. Yeah. You just have to save it in the directory you're working in, but you don't have to re-import it every time. Yeah, it'll stay living in there. Okay. So I'm also just going to go through and show you a couple of other of the visuals that you can make in R. And the great thing about all of these is you can find the directions to make all of these and the code online. And so all you need to do to go remake them is just substitute the specifics for what they're making with the specifics of what your data set has, which can take a little finessing, but it's usually not too hard to be able to reproduce what's already out there, which is why R is great, because all of the code for essentially everything is really easily accessible. This is just a shot of the code I used to make both this visual and this one. Yeah.
Can you send me this PowerPoint?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I also have a sheet with the specific walkthrough of how to make that first one if you'd like me to send you that too.
Cool.
This is just another example of a different kind of visual you can make using ggplot2. This one was a little bit strange, but essentially I picked it because it shows how customizable it is. This specific data set was trying to, you can customize it to any data set and any kind of visual you're trying to make, even if it's a little odd, even if you have a weird data set. It has so many different options that you can find a way to display what you're looking for. These are just a couple of examples of much simpler plots. Obviously, it makes the basic bar chart, basic scatter plot. And then you can also combine different kinds of plot, so you have like a scatter plot with then an in-circle on it, showing you the outliers and then the basic trend. This one also uses size too, which is actually a little bit hard to see. Actually, I will go back to it. So the size of the circles in this one represent the size, although that's a little bit hard to see. And then also more types of plots. There are just so many. There are like lists of the 50 best kinds of plots people have come up with. So it really is almost infinite what you can do with it. And as I said, there are tons of different resources for teaching yourself R. One of my favorites and my go-to is the rstatistics.co, which has really, really easy to follow, really comprehensive tutorials on a huge number of R topics, but specifically the basics. And I found that these are my favorite just to be able to follow. There are tons of others, but a lot of those assume you have more of a knowledge of R than you do. So this is where I usually start. And then this is also something I discovered a while ago, which is absolutely wonderful. It is a tutorial on the basics of R in R. So it's a walkthrough in the actual program. So you can go and open up RStudio on your computer, and you can find it under Applications. And if you have any trouble.
So what are we installing right now?
You're just installing essentially it's installing, but you're bringing up the tutorial that's already in. Yeah. It's essentially a package within a package, a bigger package that's already been installed in there. So they have, R has a lot of big packages that most people install, RStudio, a couple of others that then have, those are where a lot of these things are housed. So that's where the package ggplot2 is housed. So you essentially just calling it after it's already been downloaded. Yeah. There are other more specific ones that you have to go re-download from the internet, but these are already, you're just installing something that's already there. Right, like this is something that somebody who was not affiliated with R went in and made. Yeah. So there's people that like have their whole careers are just like creating R packages. And they're not people that were part of the original team or are part of the official R team. Which is what makes R so great, is that people that know how to do this stuff, who are not affiliated, can go in and create new things. And that's what makes R so expansive, is that you have thousands and thousands of people contributing packages and different new elements and coming up with new techniques to use in it, which just gives it a much broader reach than things like SAS, which are much more contained. You have to pay for them. They're usually very expensive, and they have one specific team working on them. Not that they don't have pros. They're scattered around there. I can show you so our studio is the main one that has the most commonly used packages. So it has Shiny, R Markdown, ggplot2, Knitter. This is the one that has by far the most commonly used ones. Others are really more specifically used for very nitty-gritty stuff. So like Knitter, this one is great because it allows you to combine R with things like Markdown and HTML. You have Shiny, which is it makes it incredibly easy to build your own apps in R. Markdown creates a Markdown file in R. ggplot2, enhanced data stuff. I haven't used all of these, but it essentially depends on what you're doing. But the vast majority of people who aren't using it for very specific data sciencey stuff, Shiny, R Markdown, ggplot2, essentially RStudio. If you have RStudio and ggplot2 for the basics, that's all you really need to start out. Shiny if you're interested in making your own applications and widgets. Also, I will preface this by saying you will never know how to code in R. Nobody does. It's one of those things that you will always have to go back and look up how to do stuff. Everybody does. You'll probably start to remember some, if you do a lot of, if you use it a lot, you'll remember how to do simple things. But it just becomes quicker each time you figure out how to get over a bug. But because there's so much extensive documentation on it, it just becomes really quick to figure out how to redo stuff. Figure out how to get around the bugs. Well, not bugs, but like things that are not quite as inherently obvious.
It like install ggplot2 or something like
I'm
that?
not sure if this particularly does, but I can show you quickly on here. It's very, very easy. I already have it installed on here, but it's actually exactly the way you install any kind of package in R. So you just type install.packages, and then yeah, so it's just that very simple command. I don't know what it's doing. Oh yeah, it's telling me that I'm already updated. Yeah, it's just install.packages ggplot2. And then that works for any package you're trying to install. It'll be install.packages and then whatever the package is. It's very easy.